It's hard being a reporter.
But if it were easy, everyone would want to do it, right?
Right.
Afternoon, comrades.
Who are you guys?
Vigilantes for truth?
We're very entrepreneurial.
I'm in high school now, okay? Things are gonna be different.
I don't want them to be different.
You have to start doing some normal kid stuff.
Oh my God. Are those dead?
I thought I'd already written the most important story of my life, but this was bigger.
This town, there are all sorts of rules you gotta play by.
I think something in Erie Harbor is making people sick.
And they've been covering this up for years.
Messages keep getting clearer.
Oh my God.
And I ain't got nothing to say.
If we don't figure out what they're covering up, everyone in this town could be in danger.
We're not gonna let that happen.
Seriously, Hilde, you're like some old person Reddit feed, but like inside my house.
If something happened somewhere.
This could be how we find Richie. He saw something, and that's why he got taken.
Baby, I just know this.
Criminal, trespassing, on a school night.
But in a purposeful way. For a good cause?
We can't start a fire.
You need to get control of your daughter.
Can't start a fire.
Is that supposed to be some kind of a threat?
These guns were higher.
We have no idea what these people are capable of.
The hardest stories to cover are the ones you care most about.
We're young, but we are not stupid. I'm not afraid of you! They cannot stop her from speaking the truth.
Dancing in the dark.
Hi, everyone. My name is Milton Valencia, and I want to welcome you to the Young Reporters Contest Award announcement. This is the fifth session of a partnership between the Boston Globe, Apple TV, and the hit show Home Before Dark to promote student journalism. And we're ending it with a bang to announce the winners for our Young Reporters Contest. And I want to announce a special guest that we have with us to make that announcement. It's Hilde herself, the kind of the spirit, the lead role behind the hit TV show. So welcome, Hilde. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I just want to start before we announce the award winners and say I'm excited to do this. I was a big fan of the show. Wife and I just binge watched it, really just got through. I have a young daughter. Her name is Emerson. I think, she may be a Hilde in the making, which is exciting, a little nervous, but exciting at the same time. So it was great. It's also how I got involved in journalism, the scholastic journalism, the student journalism. So it's really kind of great to kind of see other people and young people such as yourself and all our viewers kind of following in those steps of kind of, learning about journalism and getting excited about journalism and kind of continuing on through shows like yours and programs like yours. So thanks for everything you're doing. I just want to ask a little bit about kind of your role behind the show, your thoughts on the show and how it worked out. But tell me about journalism and what we've seen in journalism from the show.
Yeah, sure. So I think journalism, especially for young people, is just such a fun thing to do because young people are also so naturally curious all the time. And young people don't have a lot of the biases that older people have because naturally you accumulate all of these biases throughout your lifetime. And when you're young, you have adults trying to kind of push it on you. But it's up to you to reject those biases and be your own person and define yourself. And I think journalism can really teach you that. And it also it just teaches you a lot of really useful skills like dealing with people and how important the truth is.
Yeah. And on that's early on in the show, we have that segment where the character Hilde is watching All the President's Men. And we have that speech, the First Amendment is, depending on you. What's your takeaway? What does that mean exactly?
What do you mean?
Just the idea of the importance of journalism. You mentioned the truth telling and the First Amendment. It's that very first one. And that was just how important is it, that truth telling and journalism and the role they play in society pretty much.
Oh my gosh, it's so important, way more than I can even articulate. Without journalism and without the First Amendment, if the people with the most money or power were able to control what we could or couldn't say and how information got to the people, then freedom would just be impossible. So journalism and getting the truth out to the people is so important.
Mm-hmm. And following up on that, there was another great line that I loved where it's Hilde's talking to her dad and saying, you know, I think he says, be smart. And she says, I'd rather be brave. And he tells her to be both. And that just kind of caught me, especially because I remember growing up in journalism and really pursuing that story and chasing things that you don't know about. What's your takeaway? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I try every day to be, you know, like as smart about things, as brave about things as I could be in journalism. Because you kind of need to be brave with a lot of the stuff, because if you're doing an amazing job as a journalist, people are not going to like you. There's always going to be people who think that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, especially as a young person.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I loved about the show is the truism of it, following journalism lessons. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, but if you haven't finished watching it, you know, that's your loss because it's a great show. But the little lessons, journalism lessons that are real world lessons in journalism that I picked up. One of them was later on in the show where Hilde said she had called the mayor 3 times. And what does she do? And next thing you know, they're knocking on the mayor's door. And I remember an old editor's advice where I said someone wasn't calling me back, and the editor just responded, what happened when you knocked on their door? As in, like, this is the next step, this is what you do. How real is that, I guess, in your experiences?
Oh, it's so real. You know, phone calls, it's always kind of easy if they answer phone calls. They never really do. I always phone call first and they usually don't answer, but it's a lot hard to ignore somebody when they're knocking on your door physically. So it's a lot easier to pin people down like that.
Yeah. And then the last question on that end, another one that I picked up real world journalism was where the character Hilde's with their dad, and they were doing a big interview at the end. And Hilde almost goes to interrupt the person that they were interviewing to ask a question. And the dad nudges her. And the lesson I took is let the person talk on their own. Don't interrupt. And kind of, what kind of experiences have you had kind of not interrupting, listening to what the people are saying?
Yeah, listening is such an important skill, especially as a journalist, because you really need to be like the type of person that can just listen to people and hear them talk. You know, a lot of journalists nowadays, they don't really listen to a lot of real people, and they're, you know, focused on like what questions they need to ask and all of that stuff. But if you really just take the time and listen, it's so important.
That's great. That's great. And I think that's, as you said, we're here to tell other people's stories. You know, we're storytellers in that sense, whatever your platform is, whether it's writing for a newspaper or a magazine or taking photos or video or audio, we're here to tell other people's stories. So it's important to listen and convey and take that learning experience and kind of, you know, portray it for the world. And that's what journalism is. It's as simple as that. It's a learning lesson. So that brings me to our winners. We had a number of entries, a number of great entries. You're going to announce the winners. I want to talk about a few of the entries first. And I want to kind of just throw a note out there. If anybody has Q&A, as Hilde does some of the interactions with our winners, please submit those Q&A. This is a question and answer career, question and answer, a game, I guess, that we're in called journalism. So we answer questions as well. So feel free to ask. But the entries were very much that spirit that Hilde, you and I were just talking about, going out and finding new things and listening to people and telling their story and having that principle of truth, you know, kind of getting out. One of the things I've loved about journalism is kind of going out and learning something new. I've been with the Globe for about 15 years now. I've done things that I wouldn't have done if I wasn't a news reporter. So it's been a great experience for me. And I saw that in a lot of the student entries. There was a student who went out and interviewed people at a skate park, and they learned about that skateboarding community and told that story. So many great lessons in that sense. Another one who interviewed someone who started his own coffee shop and talked about what it was like to run a coffee shop and do that operation. So I saw a lot of writing, and you could tell these students were really taking away from the interview, taking away from what they were learning and kind of really conveying that. So it was great to kind of see all these entries. I want to mention 2 honorable mentions that kind of came in for me that really stood out. One of them, I'm not sure if she is on the call, but I just wanted to note her. Her name is Emily Schaaf. I hope I say that right. From Wayland High School here in Massachusetts. She wrote about a new history program, a new history class, where it was forgive me, going through the attic, where the history professor would go kind of through attic or talk about going through attic, and it was called attic archaeology. And the whole idea was going through your grandparents' home and finding these new kind of mementos, history. It was a history project, but really in your home. And you could tell Emily really kind of gained insight from it and was able to tell that story, tell the teacher story about how great it was. And for me, that was journalism at its finest, not knowing much about a topic, but going out and kind of learning a little bit about it and really kind of telling that story. Another one was, all the judges agreed, was a tearjerker, a student named Zoe Coelho, also from Hopkins, also from Massachusetts, Hopkinson High School, actually. She wrote a very poignant, emotional story about a young woman a young girl, 10 years old, I believe, who received a heart transplant. After several surgeries, and she was thriving. And she wrote about that connection between the family of the heart donor and also the family of this person who received it. And just, it was beautifully written, but it got back to what you and I were talking about, Hilde, that lesson about writing about humans and emotion and connecting with people. So it was just all very well done. They were all winners in my view. These were definitely honorable mentions, but there were really two that stood out. So I'd love to talk to you, let you introduce them and kind of get your thoughts as you read them.
Yeah, I was so impressed by a lot of the admissions that I've read. It's just, it makes me so happy even talking about it. But yeah, can I announce the winners now?
Yeah,
okay,
perfect.
Please. Perfect. All right, so I'm so excited to be here and announce the winners, Arielle Kuyumjon and Shania Mueller. Congratulations.
Great. Now, Arielle is on vacation and she's having connecting difficulties, so she may not be able to connect with us, but I loved her piece. I can speak a little bit more about it, but why don't you and Shania talk about her piece first?
Shania, I just want to say, I know we were talking about this a little bit before, but I think I reread your article probably like 5-6 times. It's just so impressive. It was so well written. Not only was it like so interesting, all the information, but the way it took me a while when I first started writing to really like paint a picture about things, and like to really when I was writing, it was hard for me to get visuals down, and you were so good at that, like right off the bat. Like the way you started it with your lead, it really just hooked people in. So amazing.
Thank you so much. I want to say, first of all, I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so honored to be recognized by the Boston Globe and Apple TV and Hilde, of course, and everyone here. But yeah, I really loved this article that I worked with Ms. Magazine, and it's about a student-run organization called Teens Take Charge, based in New York City, that fights against school segregation in the New York City public schools. And I've always been interested in writing about student activism because I found it so profound that students my age, Generation Z, has taken such a stand against inequalities, but I had never heard really a lot about school segregation in public schools like near my area. So I found it incredibly interesting. So I got to interview many students of color about their experience in the New York City public school system and what inequalities they faced in the schools. I also got to speak to some leaders in this field, as well as reaching out to the New York City Department of Education, where I learned a lot about phone calling and what you said before about being adamant as a student journalist to find interviews. So it was just an honor to write the story and bringing these students' voices out.
Shania, can you tell us a little bit about how you came about the story, like how you came upon it, and what made you want to write about it?
Yeah, I think I had heard about the group online briefly, and I was really taken aback because I don't think many people know about, like right now, that there are inequities in the public school system. I learned about the tests, the very difficult tests that are similar to the SAT that New York City public school, middle school students take before they enter high school. And so they get picked to enter these very prestigious high schools. And I learned about how, students of color faced inequities, and how students of color, Black students, Latino students weren't accepted as much into the more prestigious, better funded schools, as well as, the others. So when I came across it, I found it so profound and also so inspiring that these students who were my age, some younger, some older, that were truly taking a stand, talking to Mayor Bill de Blasio, fighting for change in the public school system. And I truly wanted to bring these voices out. And when I spoke to them, it was moving, very moving to speak to them. So I'm truly inspired and honored that I got to write about them.
And Shania, you bring up an important note that a lot of entries and a lot of high school journalism and journalism in general involves a lot of opinion. But there's also the importance of separating the two and being that news reporter. And I said that earlier about not making it your story, but listening to other people and sharing their stories. Can you tell me about that? Because it seems you're very passionate about this, but it wasn't about you. It was about them. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. What Hilde was talking about before, in this world where there's been rising, fake news, and I see it every day. I find it so important that student journalists like Hilde and myself and all the other people who, were part of this competition are bringing out the true stories, and especially at a community and a local level. I think it's even more important to bring out those voices who are not heard. And finding those local organizations. I recently wrote an article about another organization called the Homegirl Project, where young women of color were uplifting other young women of color to go into politics, which was incredibly interesting. And I think that listening to those stories, to those activists, those students who wouldn't usually get that platform to speak about the incredibly important things that they're doing and they're pushing for. And I'm really happy that I get to be a part of that and be an activist myself as a journalist to bring these voices to the forefront.
And one of the things that we know that Hilde stresses is the idea of truth. So we saw a lot of feature article submissions, great ones. I'm thinking of a submission about a women's wrestling team, or I can't remember what state it was, but a new wrestling team involving women. I'm thinking of another one where one of the teachers at the school was a hockey player, a professional hockey player. So these are great human interest feature stories that we talked about earlier. But you wrote about segregation and school segregation, a real, I call it a meat and potatoes issue, a policy issue that your stories like yours can impact and change and have an effect on. So when you approach this, it wasn't just telling their stories, but it was really getting to the truth and getting to that kind of, as you said, racial equity, income equity. How important was it for you in that sense?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important. I mean, it's kind of shocking to see that segregation is still taking place today. And I found it, as I started speaking to the students, I started researching, and as I reached out to the Department of Education and read what their policy was and why they weren't changing their policy, was very interesting to me. And I think now I'm very glad that this story is out. And I recently read another article about Teens Take Charge in a very popular news source. So I'm very happy that this incredibly important issue is being brought to the public, to public knowledge, because in the end, this true news is so important, especially this topic about school segregation.
And I appreciate the name Teens Take Charge. That's one of the things I noticed when I read the article several times, as Hilde did, because it's not only those teens taking charge, it's you taking charge as well, and your role as a journalist, bringing light and sharing people's stories. So I just want to say thank you for doing that, and congratulations as well. I see Arielle popping in. Arielle, can you hear us? Are you in network or no? she unfortunately is not. But let me tell you a little bit about her piece. It was a podcast, so a little bit different than a lot of the news articles and opinion articles that were submitted. And Arielle's, I believe she was in 8th or 9th grade at the time. So it was interesting to see. I call this the new generation. You guys are the new generation, but I'm the kind of old scribe from the newspaper format. But we have new video platforms, new audio platforms, and this was this new form of journalism at its finest. It was a podcast, and let me just give you quickly the name of the podcast itself. It was "Is This Green Space Too White?" And it's a park wake-up call. And in this episode, as Arielle described it herself, learn about Rock Creek Park, the surreptitious racial divider between Washington, D.C.'s neighborhoods. Communities of color are disproportionately affected by climate change, especially of green gentrification. And Hillary, what were your thoughts on when you heard the podcast?
It was like really good. I think when you're reading something or in this case, listening, you could really tell when somebody's really passionate about an issue. And I could really tell with you that you were just interested. I think a lot of mistakes that journalists make is they write about stuff that they think that other people will find interesting. But if you don't find what you're writing about to be like interesting to you or something that's important to you, then you shouldn't expect other people to. So I could just it really translated well. I could really tell that you were like passionate about it, and it was really, really well done. It was cool. The podcast format was cool too. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
It was different, right? As I was going through it, I was reading different stories, and I was like, all right, this is great, this one's better, this one's good. And then it was, oh, it's a podcast. And it was interesting because it was a kind of feature-ish intro where she's describing the environment and this green park. It's beautiful. And I think I'm here to learn about kind of like Discovery Channel environmental lesson. And then she kind of gets really quick into that nut graph that we would write in news writing, really about the punchline, about the racial inequities and disparities. So really she got into another meat and potato story that brought about difference. And as I was listening, I thought this was great because Hilde, you said it yourself, she sounded passionate. Arielle, you sounded passionate, as in this topic was yours. And then at one point you brought in an outsider, someone who provided their own perspective. And that's journalism. That's what we talked about, right, Hilde? That idea of hearing other people's stories. I'm seeing a chat from Arielle right now. I can type in the chat. I'm so honored and thrilled to be here. We're so honored and thrilled to have you. So I just wanted to say that really out loud. But Hilde, what was your take as, because this was different formatting, but did you still get those, what were the underpinning lessons and tools of journalism that you took away there?
Yeah, I think some people can be really strict on like, it's not journalism unless it's in like a newspaper or this like really like prestigious thing. If you're like writing a story, or if you're like putting out content that's informing people and that's like interesting, then it's journalism, and there shouldn't be any like hierarchy about that. And I really enjoyed the podcast format. I think it's cool. I think in the future, journalism, I think it's probably going to change a bit, and the format that it's in is going to change. So it's kind of cool to see that. Yeah, and I enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah, and I tell people that in journalism, more people are reading than ever before, or accessing journalism. They're just doing it in different ways through the web, through online. So why not provide those kind of formats and those platforms, whether it be podcasts or different audio in general? You take a lot of video. Have you seen your video kind of? What kind of changes you've seen or effects that you've seen that video has had that maybe not the written word has had? Some people don't want to read a 5,000 word story, but they'll sit there and absorb what they can see in video.
Yeah, I think human interest stories sometimes can be better on video, or video where like there's like really good art for it, like really good pictures, which you still could put that in a newspaper. Also, if you're talking to somebody more like colorful and like quirky, sometimes it's fun to have a video interview with them. You just kind of have to take it story by story, but usually human interest stories I like doing video for.
And Shania, I wanted to open it up to Hilde, questions and answers for you as well. I know a lot of people are excited to meet you. I was excited to meet you. Shania, you have any questions? Anybody in the room have any questions for Hilde while we have her precious time?
Yeah, I had a few questions. So Hilde, I know we both have in common that we started reporting at a young age. And I know a lot of people might think that being young is a disadvantage in journalism. What do you think are the advantages to being a kid reporter?
I think, okay, it would really, really frustrate me when I started like reporting, because I was really little when I started, and I like looked small for my age too. So like nobody would take me seriously because I was like 4'5" and like, but nobody would take me seriously, and it would make me so mad at first. But if you realize that sometimes people not taking you seriously right away can be a good thing, because most of the time people look at you and they'll have one conversation with you and they'll already have like all of their like judgments about you, and they will already decide who you are as a person to them, and you're not really going to be able to change that. But if you're interviewing somebody, like I've had a lot of cases where I'd be interviewing somebody and they wouldn't really take me seriously, and then I could like start talking about questions that they probably wouldn't expect from like a little girl or whatever. So sometimes you can take people not taking you seriously to your advantage.
Perfect. And what is your favorite article that you've ever written?
This is a really hard one. Okay, probably when I like maybe 2 years after I started reporting, or maybe a year. Okay, so I was like, before this story I wrote, I wasn't doing a lot of like serious journalism. I was just doing like vandalism, which, you know, is like pretty serious, but I wasn't doing a lot of hardcore stuff. And then I got this tip one day that a house had been broken into, and I didn't have the address though. I just had the street it was on. So I knocked on, I think, every door on the street. And then finally somebody told me that like they think it was their neighbor. So I knocked on that door for like a week and they didn't answer because they were on vacation. And then it turned out to be a different house. Anyway, but when it was like a really hard to get interview. When I finally got the interview, it was really great. And it turned out that their house had been broken into, but their dog had scared it away, which was just, I remember when I got that interview, like, I think sometimes when you're doing stories, I'm sure you could probably relate to this. You can kind of like just like see how you're going to write it in your mind. Or like after you do an interview, you can just be like, oh my gosh, that's going to go there. This is so great. And I like worked so hard on this. And I remember just walking home and I felt so happy and I was so excited about it. It was like one of my first like real stories that I did. So that was probably my favorite.
Arielle has a question that I'm going to get into in a second, but following up on that, sometimes whether you're young or veteran or whatever, people don't want a reporter knocking on their door. They don't expect it. It kind of startles them. There are certain kind of trades, you know, just kind of not throwing the press pass in someone's face the first time you meet them, or a video. There are lessons that you learned along the trade. What do you tell people as far as why should they talk to you? What you have any kind of approaches to that you can share with us?
Yeah, you know, it's something that you just really have to practice. Getting people to talk to you is really just an art, and it's like you have to practice it a lot. But usually I just talk to them and I'm like, hey, like I really just want to get your side of the story. I'm not trying to pin some narrative on you. I really just want to hear genuinely what you have to say about this, and I want to get your side of the story.
I'm gonna get to Arielle's questions. She has two of them, but I just want to remind our viewers that if you have any questions in that Q&A section at the bottom, feel free. This is a great opportunity. We have Hilde here with us, and also this is a question and answer enterprise. It's journalism, so ask away. Really quickly, you answered this a little bit. I just want to follow up and kind of get you to expand on it. This is from Arielle. As a young journalist, do you ever face ageism, like true ageism? And if so, how do you combat it?
Yeah, unfortunately, I did, especially when I was younger. I can pass for a lot older than I am right now. But when I was like really little, I remember being so frustrated over it because it's something that I couldn't control at all, right? And I have all these people judging me off something that I can't control, especially when my story of like the murder that I covered went viral. I had a lot of people who were just like, they were attacking me, and I was kind of used to that because my dad was a reporter, right? And I knew that he got attacked for stories all the time, but like I was getting attacked for things that I couldn't control, and all of my information was accurate, right? And I was just being like, people were annoyed at me for things like my age or that I'm a girl, like stuff I can't control. And my credibility was completely being attacked. So that was like it's a hard thing to like reconcile with in your head, that people are probably always going to have these like preconceived notions about you over things that you can't control. But you really just have to like learn to like embrace certain things about it, like people not taking you seriously. You might get a little bit of a better interview because they won't be expecting it. It's sad, but sometimes people decide about you and about who you are when they don't know you at all, but it's hard to make them change that.
Yeah. I'd also, because I started young as well, as I mentioned, I was in high school journalism, I would almost use it to my advantage and say, okay, maybe I don't know, teach me, enlighten me, I guess, and educate me. And that way I can get the story right. If you want me to get the story right, tell me what I need to know and what I should understand. And so you can use that to advantage, because we're all masters of learning things new. This is journalism, learning new things and kind of conveying it. And if we're not going to get it right, the reader's not going to get it right. So why not take that extra time with us and kind of talk to us, and don't talk down to us, but explain it to me so I can learn. And I'm going to write the story anyway. Might as well tell me in a way that I can understand it and learn it and convey it to my readers. So let me get to another Arielle question. When you feel strongly about a topic that you're reporting on, how do you ensure that your opinion doesn't seep into your writing? How do you maintain journalistic integrity and even-handedness?
Yeah, so if I'm ever like feel like I'm like struggling, or sometimes I'll be writing something, I'm like, wait, but I just try to stay focused on making sure I have all of my information right and making sure I have both sides of the story. And if you have that, it's pretty hard to go wrong.
And one more from Arielle. How does being a journalist affect your perception of the world around
you? I've always been like very naturally like curious. So even like when I was really little, my dad was a reporter, so he would take me on stories with him sometimes. So I always kind of like looked at the world through this lens of like wanting to know more about it, which I think is true for like a lot of kids. They just kind of like grow out of it sometimes. But I think, I don't know, it's hard to answer this question because I don't really remember a time where I wasn't like super curious about things and super interested in things. I think I really just want to know things about people and about everything. I just love talking to people and that type of stuff because I want to like really listen and hear people's stories, even when it isn't like a literal story.
Yeah, and I think it kind of, I would have kind of combined that question one earlier about being even-handedness and keeping that journalistic integrity. I would think that sometimes learning the other side or things that you haven't thought about can help balance the story, right? I mean, you're not going to put anything incorrect into a story, but when we talk about learning, any experiences that as far as because you were so, asking the fair question, trying to be so fair, ever kind of have your mind persuaded the other way?
Yeah, definitely. Also, going into that last question a little bit, sometimes when I'm like arguing with people, I'll be like, oh, I should get both sides of the story. Like, I don't really, so it does bleed in my real life like that because I want to get all sides of things and I really just am interested in things.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to, I do have a couple of reader questions, audience questions. So for Hilde, why do you personally think it's so important to cultivate the next generation of journalists?
What do you mean? What, can you read that again? Sorry.
Yep. Yeah. Why do you personally think it's so important to cultivate the next generation of journalists? And what I took away from that question is why are we doing this? Why do you want to share these stories, share your story with other young people and kind of talk about the importance of journalism?
Yeah, I think being a journalist is so important because what I was saying earlier about freedom, we wouldn't really have any freedom without getting information to the people and sticking to the truth. But not just literally with journalism. I think sticking to the truth and being guided by the truth is something that you can apply in your real life in any situation, even if you aren't a journalist.
That's a great answer. I work with a high school journalism program now, and that's what I tell some of the students right away. You may not be journalists. I hope you do become journalists, but what I am going to teach you, what we're going to teach you is how to understand the world, how to ask questions, and how to communicate. So I think you kind of said it in that sense.
Especially like being skeptical. I think that's something that you can take out of journalism that you don't necessarily have to like be a literal journalist to apply in your real life.
Right, and being human too, knowing that there are other people and other beliefs out there.
Yeah.
Let me get to another question. How have you felt about the Apple TV show? How much of it is true to life?
Okay, so the whole Richie Fife storyline is pretty fictionalized, but it is true that I broke the story of the murder when I was 8 or 9. And one thing that I found really realistic about the show was me and like my family dynamics in it. I think Brooklyn and Jim, who play me and my dad in the show, did an amazing job at portraying our relationship and how in our family reporting wasn't just something we talked about, it was a way of life.
And I have, which is why when I talked about my young daughter earlier, I'm excited, but it scares me at the same time in a good way. We have a question from Dana Fox, who you may know as a producer of one of the producers of the show. And Dana asks, I bet people ask you all the time, what is your advice to kids who want to be journalists? But I would be interested in what your advice is for adults who want to be journalists. They seem to need your help. That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably, similar advice. Usually with kids, it's a lot. Kids are a lot less biased with that stuff. Nothing against adults, but a lot of times, you pick up biases as you get older. It's not really anything you can control. And of course, sometimes you're gonna like subconsciously force that stuff into what you're writing. But if you really just stay focused on the truth and follow like your natural curiosity, then you could really just do great things.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I'll say, as the adult, Dana, that it's true. If I've covered a story before, there's never the same story, but if I've covered a topic before, I've covered the topic before. But if you're seeing it through new eyes, there's nothing more exciting, and it brings out, similar to what, the character Matt did, your dad in the show did, get that excitement from chasing a new story, something new, and kind of, you get that adrenaline going. For Hilde, how do you successfully follow a story? What are the steps to reach a conclusion in your story?
Okay, so when the process of me reporting on a story is I usually wake up and I have no idea what story I'm going to report on. I'll check my email for like tips, but usually I don't really have a lot of good email tips. So I talk to businesses a lot, and I'll give them, so like every week I used to go and I'd give businesses I used to write down my phone number for them, and then later on I got business cards, but I'd give them my contact information and I'd ask them if they had any good stories, and usually they wouldn't. But then they'd have my contact, and whenever something would happen, they would call me or let me know. Also, I just talk to I try to be a really active part of my community. Like I go to the local cafe. I went to the local cafe to write like every day, and I would always just talk to people there, and you get to know people, so then people will talk to you more about that stuff. So that's usually how I go about getting a story tip. So once I get the tip, once I know what my story is going to be about, a lot of times it'll turn into a different story when I'll actually see the people. So when I get to the people, if I have a story that I want to do and I have the concept for it, I just need to figure out what people I need to interview. So first of all, I need to think of the people really involved. Sometimes you'll be able to interview an expert on the story, but that's not always the case. If it's like a crime or something, sometimes you don't need to. But so you think of the people involved, and then for coming up with my questions, I think, who, what, why, where, when, how. And once I interview the people, sometimes if I have extra time before I'll interview them, I'll make a story template, and then I'll fill it in once I interview them. But I usually didn't have enough time for that. So I'd interview them, and then I'd go home and I'd write out the story. Or sometimes I'd write out the story on my notepad on my way home, and then I'd type it out and post it. I hope that explained it well. I don't know if that made a lot of sense. It's very different every time.
It absolutely is. But I've been there on a bus or on a train, just this is how I'm going to write that story. And I just start scribbling the idea in a notebook. Even
I've written things on my hand before when I forget my notebook.
Like a restaurant napkin, just kind of writing it down. Yeah, absolutely. I have another question for Hilde and the winner. So Shania, if you want to weigh in as well. What is the most challenging and most rewarding parts of journalism? Hilde, you go first.
Yeah. Okay, cool. The most challenging part, probably getting people to talk to you. It's something that you have to learn how to do. It's so difficult to just get somebody I mean, sometimes people can be good about it, but usually people don't want to talk to you, especially when you're younger. They don't take you seriously. And, like, you need to talk to these people for a story, and they just won't take you seriously. And you have to be like, I'm just trying to get your side of things. I want to like tell your story. I'm not trying to paint any bias on you, because people are really hesitant about talking to reporters now because all of the fake news and all of that stuff. So when you're talking to people, they don't want to talk to you generally, and that sucks. But the most rewarding thing is probably for me, when I'm done talking to people and I like am done with an interview, a lot of times I can see how my story is going to go, and I'm like thinking of all the information that I'm going to put in the story, and I just get so excited about it.
There's nothing better than seeing your name in print, illustrating the next day, right?
Definitely.
Shania, what are your thoughts on that?
I totally echo what Hilde said. For me, the most challenging part is definitely the interviewing. I know I started when I was not as small as Hilde, but when I was a little younger, I would be really scared to call someone for an interview and come up with the questions and be respectful. But I think with the articles that I wrote and with more experience, to be able to talk to people, even if it was challenging and even if they weren't receptive to your questions. I think with the learning experience, it became easier and easier to become more confident, especially with this Teens Take Charge article. When I had to reach out to the Department of Education, they were very, very not happy with me at all, but I kept calling them because my editor was very adamant about, you have to keep calling them if you want to have the truth for the story. And then the most rewarding part, again, seeing your name on the print or online. And also for me, since I interviewed a lot of activists or like student leaders in their local communities, to have them reach out to me and thank me for writing the article is really, really rewarding and wonderful.
And we have an answer to that question from Arielle as well. She writes, I've always had a strong sense of justice. It's difficult for me to separate my opinions from my writing sometimes. I try to consider both sides of the story and read writing that represents various viewpoints to learn from. The most rewarding part is combining my interests and making information accessible and interesting to the general public. So that's from Arielle, and I can't, agree more. We said from the onset that journalism is about hearing other people's stories for the most part, learning about them, gaining new insight, and kind of telling those stories. What better job is there, in my sense? So Shania, what's next for you?
I'm going to, with winning this, I'm going to attend the Boston University Summer Journalism Program, and I'm the editor-in-chief for my school newspaper next year. I'm really excited about that, to innovate new work for my local community, as well as writing broader, writing for Ms. Magazine hopefully, and writing for other news sources as well. I'm just very excited to delve into journalism even further.
That's great. And Arielle, if you can hear us, any kind of parting thoughts on what your future steps, we'd love to hear them. But before we go there, I think there's one more Q&A. Some journalists are looking for controversial and sensational stories to get people excited. How do you make sure that your questions are not do not direct people into this direction? Hilde, you want to address that?
Yeah, sure. You just have to focus on telling like the right information and use the truth as your like guide point. And when you do that, and then when you make sure you have both sides of the story, it's difficult, because I do think like a lot of journalists, they just want to, get clicks or views or that stuff. You just can't focus on that. Like when I'm writing a story, I never really think of like if it's gonna have like another like one of like the viral moments I've had. You just have to focus on getting like the information out to the people and thinking about like what you'd find interesting and what other people might find interesting.
That's great. And so same question for you that I asked Shania, what's next for you in that sense?
I don't know. I think I've my options open for the future. I've done journalism since I was 8, and I've been on like a hiatus from it for a little bit. because I've been focusing on acting a lot, and I'm in 9th grade and I just went back to high school. So I've been focusing on that stuff. I imagine I'll return to writing someday, even if it's fictional writing, because I love telling stories, and I don't think that's ever something I'll be able to like extinguish or like not love anymore, or not have a passion for anymore. But right now I'm trying to keep my options open.
That's great. And like I said earlier, I tell students all the time that regardless of what you do in the future, you're going to have these skills. You already have these skills of storytelling and communication.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Especially like talking to people. That's such a good skill to have. Like working a customer service job too, kind of unrelated, like helps with journalism because you have to deal with people a lot. And that's similar to journalism in that way. So you know, the skills that I've like learned from like my time as a journalist, even if I never return to it, they will always still be like valuable, and I'll still be really thankful I've had that experience.
That's great. Good for you. And Arielle just chimes in. I'm super excited to attend the BU seminar. I'm looking forward to learning new communication techniques to improve my podcast and reach a broader audience. I'm also starting a climate change, environmental justice publication at my high school. And she had said earlier that climate change was really important to her. So that's great. That's that example of you know, focusing on something that interests you and learning about it so you can convey it to your readers. So this has been a great session. It's been a great 5 sessions. We all absolutely love what we've learned, and we love the show. So I want to say thank you for your time, Hilde. Shania and Arielle, you know, congratulations to you both. It'll be great. Stick with it. And Hilde, parting thoughts on kind of this whirlwind of the show and journalism in general. What do you want to tell your viewers?
I just want to say to the two of you especially, I'm so excited to see where your like career is going to go, and I'm so excited to read more of your writing in the future. And congratulations to both of you. And thank you guys. Thank you again for having me. This is so fun. It makes me so happy to like see this and read a bunch of other young people like doing a similar thing that I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of stuff that I could get from like both of your like writing, and like a lot of things that you could teach me about. So I'm just very thankful to have this opportunity.
That's great. Thank you for everyone. All of you keep at it, and I'm really, really happy to have joined you. So thank you as well. And best of luck to everyone, and enjoy the summer. Thank you. And don't forget Home Before Dark, season 2 tomorrow. Thanks, guys.